Welcome to Utrikesmagasinet, and especially welcome to Maxim Eristavi. You're a Ukrainian journalist working at Hromadske TV. Can you tell us about what kind of a media project this is and what the situation is for the media in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great honor being here. Well, Hromadske translates as public TV, and it was founded in 2013 amid horrible pressure, horrible repressions against journalists under the President Yanukovych regime. And it was a refugee camp for all those journalists who were unable to find a place as independent journalists to practice their profession in proper way. So they founded something that they envisioned to be maybe in future a public broadcaster, because Ukraine doesn't have one still, a public broadcaster out of the system. And then they thought maybe along the way, when the time is right, they will just take this already existing structure and implant to something that will become public broadcaster. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but at the same time, Hromadske TV is absolutely unique example for the whole region. It's a civil society initiative run and supported by journalists themselves. It doesn't have any ties to the state or businesses. It's being supported by the viewers and also by donations from international organizations. The whole structure is completely transparent, so everybody can find out how much money, who spends on what. But what's more important, I think, in a region that is ridden with propaganda wars of really nasty level, Hromadske stands apart as the only refugee camp for independent, non-biased journalism. Because for many Ukrainian media, it's very hard to find this balance between being citizens and being objects of foreign propaganda and journalists. But at the same time, it's a bit sad that in a country of 40 million, such a huge country, there is just one newsroom that is absolutely independent. Because 99% of Ukrainian media market, or if you look at the region as a whole, is tightly controlled by oligarchs still. So we're dealing with the situation when we have quite stable media freedoms, especially if compared to Russia. But there are quasi-media freedoms because those newsrooms are being run as just pocket projects of their owners.
And I've heard you saying that to understand Ukraine, one has to understand the role of the oligarchs, and it also goes back to the Soviet times.
Of course, I think that, oligarchs, they're basically a byproduct of the Soviet system. Those people who were keen and lucky enough to grab their wealth during the chaotic period of Soviet disintegration and to consolidate their wealth during that period. But unfortunately, it led to the situation where oligarchs are in control of every aspect of local life, whether it's economy, politics, social transformations. And this is very contested line of conflict in the whole region of Eastern Europe between oligarchs and reformists. And I don't think, if you want to understand this region quite good, you have to look at the oligarchs and specific oligarchs and how much power they retain and how much influence they have on the situation in the region. Because we usually will look at the history or Soviet past or geopolitics or the stance, juxtaposing stance with Russia. But in truth, you have to understand oligarchs. And unless their grip over the region is not lessened, the region will be ridden with corruption and instability, and it's quite toxic situation.
And President Poroshenko came to power in 2014, promising to fight corruption. And recently his name appeared in the Panama Papers. How has this been received in the Ukrainian society?
Well, President Poroshenko himself is one of the richest men in the country. It's the sixth richest man in Ukraine. It's the only wealthy person from all those 6 people whose assets kept growing in the last 2 years. And unfortunately, as for example, Panama Papers, where Hromadske was an important part of this process of exposing those documents, showed us that President Poroshenko is not very honest with the public when it comes to his assets, and he's been running his assets in the same way as any other oligarch in the country. I don't think that when it comes to the scope of law breaking, it's not as big, and many things are just technical violations. But at the same time, it raises gigantic ethical questions that for many elites who run the country, even if they manifest their desire to do reforms, they still do the business old ways. And for them, it's very natural. So I think it's quite naive, and if you're looking into the recent polls in Ukraine, the public understands and realizes that this thing too. It was quite naive to expect that the man who's the product of the same oligarchy system will be able to launch powerful reforms in the country.
And after Russia's annexation of Crimea and the war in the East with the separatists and Russia, what has happened with the reform process then in Ukraine?
Well, I think just because Ukraine, in my personal opinion, is still going through a powerful process of revolutionary changes, you have a lot of mixed signals, and you can't quite paint a clear picture of what's happening. And you have positive sides and negative sides. Like when you look into the legislation of the Ukrainian parliament in the recent 2 years, they passed more than 2,000 laws. This is, by some accounts, the most dynamic legislative process in the world at the moment. But at the same time, in Ukraine, like again in many other countries of Eastern Europe, legislation doesn't matter as much as implementation. And when it comes to implementation, there are many powerful vested interests that block implementation of any reformist agenda. But you have, when you look at the government, for example, there is no such thing as unified Ukrainian government. You have clusters of extremely talented, energized reformers, and you have clusters of horrible, jaw-dropping corruption, even at the same ministries. Like, for example, Ministry of Finances or Economy is, by this time, were known reformers. Then you have Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Internal Affairs, who struggle with the really corrupt practices and being exposed. So I think what is actually the biggest challenge right now is to look into a couple of next years and to find out if the number of reformists and their energy was enough to turn the things around. Because at the moment, I don't think that you can honestly believe anyone who can say, who will keep saying with 100% assurance that there are no reforms or there are many reforms in Ukraine. It's a very delicate balance at the moment still.
You are openly gay. Can you explain to us what the situation is like for the LGBT society and also for advocates of gender equality?
I think it's unfortunately a very sad situation because while we're seeing the whole country in the middle of dramatic historic changes, the issue of civil rights equality doesn't fit anywhere in the agenda. And personally, I find it very odd that in a country of 40 million, you have just a handful of people who are openly gay and must keep the low profile or being closeted just because out of fear. Because in recent 2 years, the violence is on the rise. The unchecked activity of far-right groups are not being controlled or not being punished by the state in any way, provoked a series of really horrible crimes against gay people in Eastern Europe and specifically in Ukraine. And personally, I'm sick and tired of local political elites being unashamed of using hate speech language, provoking more hate inside the society. Ukraine has passed a historic anti-discrimination law when it comes to gender equality and LGBT people in workplaces, while the Speaker of the Parliament was saying that, God forbid, there's going to be any gay marriage in this country ever. And I think that the situation as bad as in Russia, although in Russia they have specific anti-gay laws, but in Ukraine they don't have that. But the silence is what keeps the situation even more horrible, because with the absence of anti-hate crime legislation, with the absence of any protection from law enforcement agencies of queer people in the country, we don't even know how many people keep dying every week from hate crimes or from, for example, taking their own lives because of constant bullying or absolutely no prospects at recognizing them or supporting them.
And gender equality.
This is, I think, this is a very important question, but in my opinion, we should keep it together as a general question of civil rights equality. Because as I keep traveling and meeting with different activists from different aisles of activism, whether it's LGBT or gender equality, I quite clearly see the pattern of previous mistakes in many developing countries that were made when it comes to fight for civil rights equality and gender equality. For example, in some countries there was a powerful progress when it comes to LGBT rights. But then, the parliament can pass progressive LGBT law, and the next week to pass law that limits reproductive rights of women. It says a lot that we're dealing with the lack of understanding of the concept of equality. That's the case with Ukraine too. You see, you have different dynamics happening inside one country, and obviously Ukraine has some really positive legacy from the Soviet Union when it comes to gender equality. Women are more free when it comes to especially equality at the workplace. They're powerful figures in business. They have the same paychecks, but at the same time, issues of sexism, misogyny of any kind is on the rise, and there is a lack of discussion about general equality. People don't understand why it's so wrong to limit specific people from limit their access to equal constitutional rights. That's where we have to address this issue as a united front, not just talking about trans rights or gay rights or women's rights, but pushing in developing countries a greater understanding of equality.
Thank you so much for helping us to understand Ukraine better. And
thanks for having me. It's a great honor.